Hey Algebra 1, this is Mr. Biney coming at you with another day's notes. So your little pop quiz for the day that nobody will comment on in next to the video so we can save it for class is, what is it called when a word, like if we take mom and spell it backwards, still comes out to be the same word? So taco cat spelled backwards is still taco cat. Lion oil spelled backwards is still lion oil. So there's a word for that. There's a term for when a word can be written backwards and stay the same. So that's what you guys got to find. So for today's notes, moving on, we are going to be working on a new type of solving quadratic equations called completing the square. So if really quick for a second we go down to our first example, I'll show you why we need this skill, why it's important. So if we look here at number 1, if we would try to just factor this normally, our last number, 16, is going to be our multiplying number, and our middle number, negative 14, is going to be our adding number. But all the factors of 16, which are just 1 and 16, 2 and 8, and 4 and 4, none of these can add to be negative 14. So it's not factorable. So that tells us we need to find a new strategy to try to solve it. So if we go back up to the top a little bit. So you guys know we've talked about our standard form for a quadratic equation is going to be ax squared plus bx plus c. So our goal, in order to solve these, is to make it look like something that we were able to factor, because that's how we found our zeros when we were solving by factoring. So we want to take something that we can't factor and manipulate it so that we can factor it into a perfect square. So just one set of parentheses squared. That's our end goal. So in order to do that, we need to find a c value, just like the first example says. What's the value of c so that this trinomial can become a perfect square? So up here, just comparing our standard form equation with the rule for finding a perfect square, the only difference that we can see is c became b over 2 squared. So that's our goal. So first, when we try this first example, we got to find our b value, which is going to be right over here in front of the x. So our b value is going to be 16. Then if we follow this rule from up here, our c that we want is going to be b, which is 16 over 2 squared. 16 divided by 2 is just 8, and we still have that squared up there. And 8 times 8 is 64. So now we have our new equation is going to be x squared minus 16x plus 64. And if we factor that, it'll come out to be x minus 8 times x minus 8, which we can rewrite as x minus 8 squared. And that was our end goal. We wanted to make it a perfect square. So our c value right here that we found is 64. That was our magic number. So now on these problems on the bottom, we're going to go one step further and actually find the solutions to the equations. So that's where we find where x makes the equation equal to 0. So first, just starting off looking at this, there's no way to find a number, we already talked about, that multiplies to 16 and adds to negative 14. We can't do that. So we're going to have to complete the square. So our first step is we're going to find b. So b is 14. So then to find a new c value, that'll help us complete the square and factor it into a perfect square, we're going to take b over 2 squared. So 14 divided by 2 is just 7 squared. and 7 squared is 49. So this is our magic C value that we'll come back to and use. So now how we actually use it is first we're going to get that x squared minus 14x all by itself. So how I did that was I just subtracted 16 from both sides, and then I was able to get just the x's on one side of the equation. Then next, for my second step, I am going to add on that c value that we need. So that was 49. So I'm going to add that on. And what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So I have to add 49 onto the other side as well. Then, now we can factor this side is going to be a perfect square. So this is going to be x minus 7 squared. So instead of worrying about trying to factor that every time, whatever your b over 2, so here our b over 2 was 7, b over 2 is going to be right here. So once you find that already, you don't have to go back and try to think about trying to factor that again, because we've already done that. So that's what number goes right there, and then equals 16. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to include the negative in there. So that was a negative 16. So negative 16 plus 49 is going to give us positive 33. Now, just like when we solved using square roots, we got to get rid of this little squared that's up here. So to do that, we are going to do the opposite. We're going to square root. And what we do to one side, we do to the other. Then those will cancel. So we'll be left with x minus 7 equals, and we have to remember it's going to equal the positive square root of 33. And x minus 7 is going to equal the negative square root of 33. Then from there, we just have to get x alone. So we can add x to both sides. So x is going to equal the square root of 33 plus 7. And x is going to equal negative square root of 33 plus 7. Then if you type that in your calculator, for this section, decimals are totally fine. So square root of 33 plus 7 is going to equal 12.7. And negative square root of 33 plus 7 is going to equal 1.3. So those are our two solutions. So moving on to the next one. Our first step again, we are going to find b. So b is always the number right in front of the x. So our b here is 9. So then our c value that we're going to look for is b, which is 9, over 2 squared. And 9 divided by 2 is 4.5, because our decimals are still okay. Squared, and 4.5 squared is 20.25. So that's our c value that we'll come back to later. So then looking back at the one we did earlier, the first example, our first step is going to be to get the x squared and the x terms on one side alone. So we have x squared plus 9x, and then to get rid of that 15, we have to subtract it over because it was a positive. So it's going to turn into a negative 15 over here. Then our second step, we're going to add in that c value that we found. So x squared plus 9x plus 20.25 equals negative 15. And what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So we're going to add that same number, plus 20.25. Now, we've accomplished our goal of wanting this left side to be a perfect square. So now this is going to be a perfect square of x plus, this is our b over 2 value. So that was the 9 over 2, which is 4.5 squared. And then equals negative 15 plus 20.25 equals 5.25. Then our last step, just like solving for square roots, we got to square root the whole thing to get rid of that squared. And one side we have to do to the other. So then we get x plus 4.5 equals positive square root of 5.25. And x plus 4, 5, can't forget about it, equals negative square root of 5.25. Yeah, it's a decimal point right there. All right. Then all we have to do is subtract 4.5 over in both of them. So this one is going to be positive square root of 5.25 minus 4.5, which you can type in your calculator because we're okay with decimals. And that's going to come out to be negative 2.2. Then if we look at our second one, if we subtract 4.5 over, we'll get x equals negative square root of 5.25. Sorry again, that's a decimal. Minus 4.5. And then if you type that in your calculator, we'll get x equals negative 6.8. And there you have it. So these next two, because the video is already a little over 12 minutes, we'll cut it off short for you. Examples 3 and 4, you can try them. I'd actually like if you did that. Otherwise, we can do those as a warm-up. Have a great